about trusting him. He was the security guard. But why is he still watching me? Nightmare 1. When I moved into my apartment, I didn't know anyone in the building. Everything felt unfamiliar and honestly a little uncomfortable. So when the older woman across the hall introduced herself, I felt relieved. Her name was Carol. She seemed kind, warm, the type of person who made a new place feel less lonely. A few days after I moved in, she knocked on my door again while I was unpacking. "If you ever lock yourself out," she said, smiling, "I keep spare keys for a few neighbors. It saved them more than once." At first, I hesitated, but she had lived there for years. Everyone seemed to know her. She felt trustworthy, so I gave her a spare key. For a while, nothing seemed unusual. Then, little things started happening. I'd come home and notice my kitchen cabinet slightly open, even though I always closed everything before leaving. A picture frame on my shelf was turned at a slightly different angle. Once, my bedroom light was on. Even though I clearly remembered turning it off, I kept telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe I was more stressed than I realized. But one day, something happened that I couldn't explain. I left my laptop on the coffee table before going to work. When I came home, it wasn't there. I searched everywhere. Then I walked into my bedroom. It was sitting on my desk, plugged in, perfectly centered. I knew I hadn't left it there. I contacted the leasing office, thinking maybe maintenance had entered. They told me no one had accessed my apartment. That night, I set up a small indoor camera facing my living room. The next day, I checked the footage during my lunch break. At 1:12 p.m., my front door slowly opened. Carol walked inside. She didn't look nervous. She didn't rush. She calmly walked through my apartment, touching things, adjusting objects, opening drawers. Then she sat on my couch, in complete silence, for almost 20 minutes. She wasn't stealing anything. She was just there. When I confronted her, she broke down crying. She said she felt lonely after her husband passed away. She admitted she had spare keys to multiple apartments. She would let herself in just to feel less alone. Nothing was stolen, nothing was broken. But I moved out 2 weeks later because the scariest part wasn't what she did. It was knowing she could have been inside my home at any time without me ever knowing. Trusting someone with access to your home is already uncomfortable, but trusting someone whose job is to make you feel safe can be even more dangerous. And if you're enjoying these true stories, consider subscribing to Nightmare Central, because the next nightmare only gets worse. Nightmare 2. After someone broke into a house 2 streets away from mine, I decided to install a home security system. The technician arrived exactly on time. He wore a company uniform and introduced himself professionally. He seemed knowledgeable, confident, reassuring. He walked through my house explaining the best camera placement. Front entrance, back entrance, and one covering the side yard, he said. He mentioned blind spots and angles I hadn't even considered. That actually made me feel better. He knew what he was doing. When he finished, he helped me download the app and showed me how to view the cameras remotely. Everything worked perfectly. For the first time since the break-in nearby, I felt safe again. 2 nights later, I received my first alert. Motion detected. Backyard camera. I opened the app immediately. Nothing was there. I assumed it was an animal. The next night, another alert. Motion detected. Side yard. Again. Nothing. But the alerts kept happening, always between 2 and 3 a.m., always outside the main camera view. Then one morning, I noticed footprints in the dirt beside my house, just beyond the camera's angle. I contacted the security company. They said everything appeared normal, but something didn't feel right. Police reviewed my footage more carefully. In one reflection from a window, barely visible, was the outline of a person standing just outside the camera's field of view, watching. Investigators later discovered something disturbing. The technician who installed my system had returned to multiple homes weeks after completing installations. He knew where cameras couldn't see. He knew how long alarm delays lasted. He knew exactly how to move without being detected. I had trusted someone to make me feel safe. Instead, I unknowingly showed him exactly how to avoid being seen. I replaced the entire system the next day, because sometimes the person who builds your sense of security is the same person learning how to break it. The last story showed how trust can give someone access to your home, but the next story shows what happens when trust is built into someone's job description. Because when someone's role is to protect you, you rarely think to question their intentions. Nightmare 3 is the most disturbing story in tonight's episode. Nightmare 3. I didn't usually stay late at the office, but that week, I didn't have a choice. Deadlines were stacking up, and the project I was working on kept running into delays. By the time I finally finished everything, it was well past 10:30 p.m. Most of the lights in the building had already been turned off automatically. Entire sections of the office floor were dark. The silence felt different at night. Every sound seemed louder. Every hallway felt longer. When I reached the elevator, I realized I hadn't seen another coworker for over an hour. The lobby was nearly empty when the doors opened. That's when I noticed the security guard sitting behind the desk. I had seen him many times before. He was always polite, quiet, professional. He gave a small nod as I walked past. "Working late tonight?" he asked casually. "Yeah," I said, trying to finish a deadline. He stood up. "It's pretty quiet out there this late. I can walk you to your car if you'd like." I hesitated for a second, but he worked there. He had a uniform, a badge, and honestly, the parking lot was dark. "Sure," I said. "Thanks." We walked through the front doors into the night air. The parking lot was dimly lit, with only a few scattered cars left. Our footsteps echoed slightly as we crossed the pavement. He made small talk as we walked, asked how long I'd worked there, mentioned that fewer people had been staying late recently. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. When we reached my car, I thanked him and unlocked the door. I expected him to walk back toward the building immediately. Instead, he stood there, just watching. Then he asked something that made me uncomfortable. "Do you usually stay this late?" I gave a vague answer. "Just when work gets busy." He nodded slowly. "I notice patterns," he said. The way he said it made my stomach tighten, but I brushed it off as awkward conversation. I got into my car and drove home. I tried not to overthink it, but the next morning, something strange happened. When I walked to my car in the company lot, there was a folded piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. I assumed it was a flyer, but when I unfolded it, I felt my chest tighten. It simply said, "You looked nervous last night. You don't have to be." No name, no explanation, just that sentence. I threw it away, convincing myself it was coincidence. Maybe someone had mistaken my car for someone else's. But 2 days later, I stayed late again, this time unintentionally. I lost track of time working on a report. When I finally packed up, the office was completely empty, even quieter than before. When the elevator doors opened, the same security guard was there. He smiled slightly. Late again. This time, I declined the escort. "I'll be okay," I said. He paused for a moment, then nodded. "All right, just being careful." As I walked through the parking lot alone, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I got into my car quickly and locked the doors. When I looked up, I saw him standing just outside the entrance, watching me leave. The next morning, there was another note on my windshield. "You really shouldn't walk alone out there." My heart started racing. I reported the notes to building management. They told me they would review camera footage, but the notes continued, always short, always vague, always referencing details about when I arrived or left. One message said, "You changed your routine yesterday." I hadn't told anyone I adjusted my schedule. Another note appeared days later. "You forgot to lock your car last Tuesday." I suddenly remembered that moment. I had come back from lunch distracted. I wasn't even sure how he would know that. That's when I started paying attention to the parking lot cameras. I noticed something disturbing. He always seemed to be positioned where he could see multiple angles of the lot, always observing, always aware. Management eventually pulled access logs from the security office. They discovered the guard had been manually reviewing archived footage repeatedly, not randomly, specifically searching license plates tied to employees who regularly stayed late. Police later found a notebook in his car. Inside were pages filled with notes, descriptions of vehicles, arrival times, departure times, patterns of who stayed late the most, who walked to their car alone, which areas of the parking lot had the poorest lighting. My name appeared multiple times, along with details about what days I typically worked late, how long I stayed, even notes about what entrance I preferred using. One page simply said, "Usually alone after 10 p.m. Investigators later discovered he had been gathering information for months, possibly longer. He had used his position to quietly observe employees who trusted him to keep them safe. The escort offers weren't random. They were opportunities to get closer. He was terminated immediately and later charged with stalking-related offenses after other employees came forward with similar experiences. Something even scarier than these nightmares is not watching more videos from Nightmare Central. This was nightmares of trust. Sleep carefully.